Guten Abend. Welcome to our event, Responsible Evaluation of Research and Scholarship Overcoming the Implementation Gap. Dear ladies and gentlemen, together with the HRK, the Hochschulrektorenkonferenz, the conference of the rectors of the German universities, and the Berlin-Brandenburgische Akademie der Wissenschaften. The house in which we sit in is the seat of that Berlin-Brandenburgische Akademie. I welcome you as chair of the Einstein Foundation to this event, which fits well and is part of the effort which the Einstein Foundation is always looking at as part of its task. You know that the ways we look at and evaluate research, these ways were conceived in the middle of the last century and even before that. And one thing we have to be aware of, the way I see it at least, is that there was once a time in which Europe could create standards and mint ways of going forward. Nowadays, I think times have changed, and I think they have changed for the better. Perspectives have to be global. One has to look at other cultures, other systems, other educational systems, but also other thought processes, and also ways which have become maybe usual in Japan, in Asia, in Latin America, all over the world, as a matter of fact. Now, we owe it to younger generations, and we owe it to the numerous researchers in the world, of all ages actually, to look at these systems we have dealt with for so long. Most of us know that numerous papers have been written about the problem of evaluation and other problems, considering that so many more science scholars and researchers in the humanities have been educated and are working in the world at this time. Now we go ahead forward, and we have to look at how can we go in other ways than we used to do it in the last decades at least. I'm looking forward to this evening. It's part of our effort to look at research and look at enhancement of quality. And I am very glad to pass the word on to Ulrich Diernagel and the others on the panel, who will discuss with you, and he will also introduce all the panelists. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, on behalf of the president of the Berlin-Brandenburgische Academy of Sciences and Humanities, Christoph Markschies, who is unable to attend, I welcome you all here at the Academy's main building at the Gendarmenmarkt. The Academy is an interdisciplinary association of scholars with approximately 400 members, who are all outstanding representatives of their fields. It collaborates with institutions and scientists worldwide. With around 300 employees, it is currently the largest non-university research institution dedicated to the humanities in the Berlin-Brandenburg region. The Academy's mission is to further the sciences and humanities in this region and beyond. It fulfills this obligation by carrying out very long-term research projects in the humanities on a large scale, by investigating topics that are important for current societal developments, and by developing policy advice on such topics, and finally by acting as an agency for science communication. It is the only academy in Germany to pursue a large number of inter- and cross-disciplinary research projects on topics of future relevance. What all these studies have in common is that they keep their distance from the everyday interests of science managers and science policy. From the observer's distance, indications and recommendations emerge that aim to lay the groundwork for future action. Their results are presented to the public in research reports and documents and memoranda. One central field in this work of the Academy has been the monitoring of short and long-term dynamics of the German science system. For many years, the Academy accompanied the Excellence Initiative. An interdisciplinary working group was first set up on that in 2008. The current working group, which is titled Changes in Universities and Their Societal Context, Consequences for Academic Freedom, ? This group continues this work in a different form. Tonight's topic is therefore not only of general interest for the Academy as a scientific institution, but it forms a core element of its research profile, and therefore we are very glad to welcome you all here for a lively discussion on this important issue. Thank you.
And gentlemen, I hope the micro is on. You can hear me? Wonderful, thanks a lot. Over the years, it has turned out that integral part of my job description is to look into very, very sad eyes, as it is obvious that I'm not the president of the German Rectors Conference. My name is Jens Peter Gaul, I'm Secretary General, and I would like to convey the warmest and kindest regards from Professor Alt. For reasons we have come accustomed to as a society, he can't be here. He is fine, but he can't be here. So he asked me to make his stand-in. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for our co-hosts for that wonderful event and invitation. I'm delighted that we have the chance to meet in person, how problematic ever it might be. This human interaction in general and in the scientific discourse in particular relies really on such opportunities to interact and exchange ideas and opinions. Throughout the centuries, you may say the nature of science and research hasn't really changed dramatically. It still is, and I'm aware that it has a slight like Harry Potter vibe, the never-ending request for truth. But I think that sums it up really and hasn't changed. But what has really undergone a kind of dramatic change is, especially in recent decades, is the framework and the framework conditions for science and research. Maybe more than ever before, science in the 21st century is, you may say, a kind of competitive game. Today, individual researchers, groups of researchers, whole research institutions, research consortia, and yes, even entire nations compete for research funding. Of course, research funding is never enough. It's always rare. And these developments put a lot of pressure on our time-worn instruments, with which we try to evaluate and assess the quality and the merits of research and scholarship. How can we identify true excellence in research? That's the key question. How can we manage the incredible workload that comes with reviewing research? How can we locate the most promising new research methods? These and similar questions are of central importance to the nearly 270 institutions that come together under the roof or umbrella of the German Rectors Conference. Across Germany, research universities, universities of applied sciences, as well as colleges of art and music, really depend on a trustworthy and effective system to evaluate research and scholarship. Again, I'm looking forward to tonight's discussion on how to improve the responsible evaluation of research and scholarship, and I'm particularly eager to learn from our international guests here on the panel. Let me conclude by thanking our partners and fellow hosts, the Einstein Foundation, as well as the Berlin-Brandenburg Academy of Sciences and Humanities. It's always a great pleasure to cooperate with such distinguished institutions, and the excellent panel and the number of guests we have seem to indicate that we're on the right track. Thanks a lot.
So, yeah, my name is Ulrich Diernagel. I'm a stroke researcher at the Charité and also the director of the Quest Center for Responsible Research at the Berlin Institute of Health. I would like to kick off by thanking Ulrike, before I forget it. She has organized the whole event, and I think we have to be thankful for all her work. That's why we can enjoy this evening. I would also like to remind us that this event is kind of part of a series of activities of the Einstein Foundation, flanking the award ceremony of the Einstein Foundation Award for Promoting Quality in Research, which will take place on December 1st. We kicked it off a few weeks ago with a symposium that was co-hosted by the National Academy of Sciences in Washington. This was about how funders can promote the quality of research. We have this evening, and there will be a whole symposium entirely organized by early career researchers, really flanking the award ceremony, and they will focus on the global dynamics of responsible research. Just short housekeeping. So the idea would be that I really briefly kick it off now, so that we're on the same page. I will then introduce the panel of experts, followed by a discussion among the panelists, and then of course we need to make sure that you get enough time to make your statements and ask your questions to the panel. So let me just start with a brief introduction on the theme. By assessing researchers, I think it's fair to say we are shaping its content, its direction, and also its culture. Currently, this assessment is heavily based on quantitative metrics and proxies, such as journal reputation or third-party funding, which I think has led to numerous unintended and often even toxic consequences. On the other hand, content, quality, transparency, even relevance to society are often underrepresented when research is assessed. Just one striking example, some of you may have seen it. Last week there was a paper published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, a study that where the authors sent out a economics paper to more than 3,000 referees of a highly reputed economics journal, and they did it in a randomized fashion in kind of three groups. One group was not informed who the authors were, they were truly blinded. One group was under the impression that this was authored by a Nobel Prize winner in economics, which was actually true, he was one of the authors. And the third group was under the impression that it was authored by an early career researcher, which was also true because he was co-author on this paper. And you may already guess what the study found, but the numbers I think are striking. So the early career researcher paper was rejected in 65% of the times, whereas the Nobel Prize winner with the same paper only got 20% rejection. So I think that's kind of a typical example, and we all know about those biases, and it's just part of the problems that we're seeing in the system. So I guess consequently, there is really a wide agreement among many stakeholders that the current system for assessing researchers and research institutions is ripe for reform, and numerous high-level institutions and stakeholders, including UNESCO, European Union, LERU, European University Association, Science Europe, you name it. They have published recommendations, declarations, position papers, statements, manifestos, and calls proposing agendas for reform. Although I guess there is a broad consensus regarding the need for a fundamental reform, defining the specific indicators and criteria to be used, along with the question of when and how often we should review and how criteria should be weighted, remains entirely open. In addition, I think important stakeholders, such as the future generation of scientists, the Global South, or societies, so the society which actually funds the research we do often not have a proper seat at the table of this discussion. So I think there is lot to discuss among us tonight. So I'm happy now to introduce our panel of experts. I'll do it in alphabetical order before each of them then has the opportunity to present a short introductory statement. And then, as I said, after a round of discussion within or among the panel members, we will invite you all to take part in this discussion. So I'll start with Jens-Peter Gaul. We just heard from him. He kindly stepped in for Professor Peter-André Alt, and we just heard about why he can't join us, and of course we wish him a speedy recovery. Dr. Gaul is has long-standing experience in major funding institutions and organizations like the DFG and the European Union, and as we've heard, is the General Secretary of the German Rectors Conference. Professor Maria Leptin is the President of the European Research Council. Prior to that, she served as the Director of the European Molecular Biology Organization and headed a research group on developmental biology there. Julie Maxton, she's the Executive Director of the Royal Society London. Before taking up her position at the Royal Society, Dr. Maxton was Registrar at the University of Oxford, and she is also a member of the jury of the Einstein Award for promoting quality in research, for which we are very grateful. To my right, to the left, from your position, is Professor Sarah de Rijke. She's a professor of science and evaluation studies and a director of the Center for Science and Technology Studies at Leiden University, as well as co-chair of the Research on Research Institute. I might add that she comes from a country that is trailblazing, I think, with respect to changing the way we assess researchers, but also in general with respect to open science. To my left is Jess Roman. She is an early career researcher and a group leader at the Center for Stroke Research Berlin at the Charité. She just defended successfully her PhD, for which I congratulate her. And I'm also very thankful that she stepped in at very short notice because we had another person to replace. I will mention that in a second. So the last person I have to introduce is Professor Uwe Schimank. He's a professor for sociological theory at the University of Bremen, and as he didn't mention it, but he's a member of the very academy that is a co-host here, the Berlin-Brandenburg Academy of Science. Finally, I would like to also wish Professor Dieter Imboden good health and speedy recovery. He was supposed to be with us on the panel. He also fell ill with this mystery disease and is therefore unable to attend. And I should also mention that Professor Imboden is the president of the jury for the Einstein Award. So, without further ado, I call upon Dr. Gaul. Please give us your statement.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Okay, I'll start. Okay, the premise of today's panel discussion is the almost universally acknowledged need to reform the way we conceive of and perform research assessment. And I assume we can all agree that the focus of any assessment should solely be on quality rather than quantity. This sounds simple, and it holds particularly true for research. Before that background, I would say for the HIK, I do recognize the need to reform research assessment, and particularly the need to treat quality assurance purely based on quantitative metrics with a great caution. I assume we would all agree here in this room about that. However, I am not yet convinced that the reform efforts we witness, especially on the European level, will serve the strive for research excellence. And it is research excellence and nothing else to which the scientific community must be committed. That would be my main belief. Consequently, at this point, I'm not yet really concerned with how to implement a reform, but with what such a reform should entail. I would therefore like to refocus and connect the larger discussion of research assessment to the principle of research excellence. Excellence is the guiding principle of all quality assurance in the sciences and humanities, and every activity to assess research is irresolvably connected to excellence. This is in its core the position of the German Rectors Conference, as well as the position of our partners in the alliance of the big science organization in Germany. Now, we would actively support the effort of the international scientific community to open, so to speak, the science system by including a greater diversity of voices and perspectives, by establishing more accessible ways of scientific communication, by opening up to data sharing and so on and so on. No question about that. Nevertheless, excellence must remain the guiding principle in the evaluation of research, because excellence is the leading principle in research as a whole. Not least, excellence is the criterion to ensure a competitive edge in the competitive game research has become over the decades. Now, if we want to maintain excellence as the assessment criterion for research, and at the same time open research assessment to other parameters, such as inclusion, collaboration, and so on, these criteria must play, from our point of view, a kind of systemic role in all application processes, as well as in the recruitment and training of young researchers. Only then can we ensure as well as foster excellence in the science system. We must be cautious not to equate new paradigms like open science with research excellence. That means new paradigms are no indicators in itself, no subsets of excellence or something like that, but mere prerequisites of a well-set research system and process. Mere prerequisites that sound simple, but is by all standards not a small thing, as it would make necessary to change the system, the research system as it is now. But speaking in categories, it's to be a mere prerequisite for the research process is something completely different than an assessment criteria. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. That was, I think this will already give us quite a lot of material for discussion. So next is Professor Leptin, please.
Thank you. First of all, thank you to the Einstein Foundation, to the Rektorenkonferenz, and to the Academy for having assembled us here. It's great to see so many faces and so many people who are interested in the topic, as we are. I may come across as sounding conservative, but I hope the discussion afterwards will show that we're not conservative at the ERC. So let's begin with the agreement on reforming research assessment. The document that's been put out on 8th of July, and the final version of a process that took nearly a year, or half a year, and that was presented at a so-called stakeholder assembly at the time, that had 350 organizations from over 40 countries attending. So does this level of interest in reforming research assessment show that something is seriously wrong with our current practices? Do we need to change the criteria related to scientific excellence? Some might say yes. I would say this is not the case. There's justification for looking. There's justification for wanting change, and note that the change comes to a large extent from the young. We older ones here, of course, are happy with the way we were selected. That's why we're here. So we have no interest in changing them. That's what functioned for us. But the young ones live in a different environment than we grew up in, and I think they have a case to make. Even so, I don't think the research assessment calls the agreement on research assessment calls for throwing everything overboard, and the way it's evolved over the past months, it's really rather well balanced. Let me quote: "The vision that it sets out is that the assessment of researchers and research organizations recognizes the diverse outputs, practices, and activities that maximize the quality and impact of research. And it continues to do this requires basing assessment primarily on qualitative judgment for which peer review is central, supported by responsible use of quantitative indicators. So the reformers are not at all attempting to lower the quality of research, but the intention is the opposite. What's being questioned is taking shortcuts for judging excellence. For example, the notorious journal impact factors, which are not bad in themselves, they're just meant for something else, rather than looking at the actual output of researchers or at the actual proposals of projects that are being submitted for granting. And it's actually quite funny that sometimes those who espouse excellence are exactly the ones who use these quantitative evaluation metrics. So as you know, the ERC is based on a simple idea. We support the best researchers to work in Europe on their best ideas. And the sole criterion is excellence, scientific excellence. And it's been an approach that's critical to the success of the ERC since it's been founded 15 years ago. And it relies heavily on the peer review panels, which themselves are sort of the core that embodies the excellence. It's the Scientific Council, again, 20 researchers who ensure the quality of those panels. The Council also hears feedback from all the panels, and there are 3 times 30 panels plus a few extra, from whom feedback is solicited every year and fed back to Council, and Council then takes this into account and defining further and evolving the way that that research is assessed. And it's actually, this way has been carefully designed to identify scientific excellence irrespective of gender, age, nationality, institution of the principal investigator, or any other potential biases which we try to avoid, and takes into account career breaks and unconventional research paths. So the ERC is clearly committed to what this agreement wants to foster, namely basing assessment primarily on qualitative judgment for which peer review is central. Now, any organization that prides itself on excellence, I feel, has to be introspective and self-critical. And so what I've done is I've set up a task force to look, A, at the processes within the ERC. Do they fulfill all the criteria? And B, at the demands from the community, at everything that's been proposed during the course of this agreement on research assessment, but also from many other sources. And I note, and have noted before, that young people have a big role to play there. We are deciding about their future, not ours. And so we had an expert elicitation workshop, an internal confidential workshop, to which we invited representatives of the young communities, Eurodoc, the young academies, postdoctoral organizations, etc., and many young researchers, as well as other candidates. So this task force, based on this input and their own analyses, is looking closely at the various proposals and recommendations for reform in the light of our own current practices. We're not done yet. We're in the process of doing that. We will put out a white paper on this, which we will be really happy to discuss with the community. And I hope we do the best in the interest of the research community and in the interest of basic research and research excellence. What's clear is we will continue to be committed to excellence and excellence only.
Thank you. And next is Dr. Maxton.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And my apologies for not speaking in German tonight. So a few remarks from me. First of all, following on from the previous speakers, of course, excellence is the guiding star for everything we do. But do we put too much emphasis on where articles are placed, where the journal impact factors are. Actually, I think we need to spend more time looking at the quality of the science, irrespective of where it is placed in journals. And that's what we are hearing in the Royal Society. We give out grants, and our applicants are saying, look more at the science. Don't look at the journal articles. Look more at the science. Do peer review. Peer review, therefore, means that as a community, we need to look to the values of the community. Clearly, excellence is a guiding value, but peer review and analysis is also a guiding factor. So we are looking at how many people will participate in peer review. In our community, we have, in the law, a jury service, which you have to do unless you have a very good reason not to attend jury service. And many of the senior scientists in the Royal Society think doing peer review is like jury service. You need to have a very good reason not to do it. It is part of the values, if you like, of our community. So I wanted to make these points about values to begin with. So we need to also, I think, to have an acceptance of different routes towards excellence. We are implementing narrative CVs. In other words, it's not just where you are at any particular point in time, but what have you done in your career? What are the outputs in your career? Then the second point I would make, leaving aside values, is on the integrity of the scientific process. I mean, of course, reproducibility is very important and absolutely essential, but we also need to think about how our labs are run, how our young people are looked after in the labs. Where do they go to afterwards? What kind of behaviours, what kind of mentors do they experience in their labs? Certainly from my own point of view, I have experienced lots of complaints about people in laboratories not enjoying what you would hope that they would enjoy as young researchers, and often giving up because of it. And I think that is a tragedy, personally, and I think we need to do something about it, and we need to think about how we mentor, how we look after people. And I do accept, of course, that senior scientists have a strong drive to succeed in their careers, but I would say not at the expense of junior scientists myself. And then the final point I would make is about diversity. So in the Royal Society, we're very keen to ensure that we lower barriers to people coming into science, so that science is a very inclusive discipline, and that all people with talent should be able to thrive in science. So what we do lots of things with schools and with young scientists to ensure that it is so. But I think also there's a diversity in output. It's not just about articles in Nature or whatever other journal. It's about intellectual property. It's about all sorts of outputs with young people, perhaps public engagement, etc. These are the kinds of things that our applicants to our awards are looking to be taken into account when they apply. So it doesn't diminish excellence, but I think it amplifies excellence. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You're next.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for having me, and it's really a pleasure to talk about this. I'm very intrigued also by evaluation. I study evaluation. We all do evaluation. So it's a professional interest and something we do on a regular basis. My team studies the impact of evaluation on knowledge creation in different fields. I think it's a crucial issue for science and for science policy in the next decades to really understand the question of quality control, especially because of the question about what science is going to have to contribute to the world. So what we've done is we've done extensive research on the impact of performance metrics on knowledge creation. We've also collaborated with others to work on proposing alternatives, including the Leiden manifesto that was published in 2015, and it was also involved in the UNESCO recommendation on open science. I agree, indeed, those change initiatives are largely proposing a balanced alternative, which needs to be worked out in practice. So it's really also creating a lot of uncertainty, but I think the idea would be to go for a balanced approach. It's also increasingly clear that this is necessary and very urgent. Evaluation affects the culture of research, that the previous speaker also addressed, the quality of the evidence informing policy making, priorities we set in research and in research funding, and it affects individual career trajectories and the well-being of researchers and other academics in institutions. These issues play out differently across disciplines and also across regional contexts, which makes it a very difficult challenge we're facing. Of course, today's push for reform didn't arrive out of thin air. It's, I think, grounded in a lot of research. It's also grounded in a lot of advocacy work. And I think all the initiatives, and I think we might share that kind of perspectives, they are directed at maintaining excellence, not undermining it. They're aimed at more efficiency, more reproducibility, more collaboration, more diversity, more equity in the science system. And unfortunately, we really need to act on these issues because these things are at stake. So this is why I wholeheartedly support the recommendations that are in most of the manifestos and other initiatives we see the agreement just mentioned. Focus on quality, not quantity. Move beyond journal-based metrics. Give value to all relevant research activities and outputs, including fair data and reusable software. Also take into account, where relevant, impact and knowledge exchange. Take into account the diversity of disciplines and career stages. Pay particular attention to researchers at the beginning of their careers. But it also requires a lot from academic leadership and the gatekeepers currently in these positions. It's actually a much more demanding form of academic leadership we need. So I'd like to make 2 points for the debate, maybe to stir some debate. And one, I think, was already pointed out, so I'll keep that brief. It's leading up to the point about including early career academics in the debate. In the discussion about responsible research assessment, I noticed that some worry that changing the rules of the game in a certain part of the world, the Netherlands, it's sometimes raised there, but also in Europe, where we also play a leading role, that might have actually grave effects on the quality of the science in that part of the world, and also the position of that science in the global competition. It's not hard to think like this in times of austerity and globalization, but I think it's important to move beyond that focus on today and about today's competition, because we really need to prepare for tomorrow and the system we need for tomorrow's real-world challenges. So we need curiosity-driven research, but we also need to urgently think about those future challenges, and this is why we really need to bring in early career academics to design these future systems. So I very much welcome the initiative that the ERC is taking. One other point I'd like to raise, if that's okay, is about academic sovereignty. It's a point that we sometimes forget to talk about or don't address because it might feel too mundane or too technical, but I think we should ensure that the academic community itself has ownership of the data and the metadata that are used in assessments. So the corpus of science is a common good, so should the data be about the research we do. So think about things like titles and abstracts and keywords and references and citations. Very important, because we also have not a move away from metrics, but toward increasingly data analytic approaches in assessment. And they are actually increasingly captured by large companies that are moving away from publishing and moving into research intelligence. And this is, I think, where the real big challenge is, these analytics-driven assessments. Increasingly common, but not really done according to scholarly values like academic independence and communality. And that's problematic, because we shouldn't outsource those types of decisions to commercial entities. So that's very, very urgent. So we need to invest in open infrastructures to have responsible research assessment. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I'm afraid the pressure's on you to tell us what we should do.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation. Also, last minute, I was very happy to accept to represent early career researchers on this panel, because we do want to have a voice in the future of the assessments and evaluations that will also impact us. And so it's really an honor to be here and to talk with all of you. Because it was a bit of short notice, I don't have quite as detailed of statement prepared, but I do have some points I'd like to bring up for consideration. So first of all, whenever you have the opportunity to involve early career researchers in your evaluation procedures and in these discussions about reforming evaluations, please do. I think that's my main message today, and I'll probably bring it up multiple times, because we are interested in this. One of the roles I have in my current position is coordinating a PhD program that I also help develop. And in Germany, it's less common than in other settings to have a structured program, but the idea is to provide students with support throughout their time as a student. And in this first week of a kickoff, there's a lot of questions about how their performance will be assessed. And we do use journal impact factor-based metrics to assess students. We outsource, let's say, the quality control to peer reviewers and ultimately journals. There is also then the external evaluators that look over the dissertation when you submit it, but a lot of the comments that come back also about my own thesis were good potential published in high impact journals. So that is something that early career researchers are interested in and aware of, not only where we're publishing, but whom we're publishing with, and in whose research labs we've worked. And ideally, not just in one, but in many, also in an international setting. There's a lot of pressures there, and I think that's okay, but it's something that early career researchers need to be aware of, because the target is moving. And as the target continues to move, that's something we'd like to better understand so that we can continue following the target and have a voice in that process. Another point, I'm a methodologist. I'm an epidemiologist by training, and so when I think about evaluating excellence, I ask, what's in that method section? How are we evaluating? Actually, how do we assess it? Who will do the evaluation? Are these people trained in evaluation techniques? Because that's something I would want to see in any observational study that I'm running. And are they biased? I spend a lot of time thinking about information bias, selection bias, confounding. Are these considerations that we have when we do assessment? And I'm very happy that there is entire research fields and domains dedicated to this cause, but we would like to be informed about those procedures. So transparency in the evaluation process, how we're being assessed, that will also help us learn lessons for the future so that hopefully we can do a better job. Because again, it's not really the idea necessarily alone that's being funded, it's how I package the idea. And I don't have necessarily that skill set yet as an early career researcher to know how to package my ideas in a way that sells and brings in funding, brings in articles, and so on. Another point I wanted to bring up is that I believe excellence can come from people who haven't published anything yet. And something I've struggled with in my own grant application so far is there's a big focus on my person, who I am, what I've published, and that's inherently connected to my ideas. I know that there are pushes for blinded assessment of ideas and how good they are. I've actually been more successful in those myself personally, but I think that's something worth exploring, that sometimes good ideas, especially ones that are very new and novel, will come from these early career voices that are not so well established, and maybe assessing their idea separate from what they've achieved is a good starting point. Lastly, I would encourage us not to do it in a vacuum. In the same journal, actually, that Uli mentioned earlier, PNAS, the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences of the USA, I believe it's called. Maybe some of you heard about it. It was quite big on Twitter last week. There was an article published by 2 economists who basically rediscovered the Likert scale, which was published in 1928 in the field of sociology in a reputable journal. And I think it was focused on measuring human feelings with integers. And we see this actually as a methodologist, I see this all the time, that a method from one domain is reinvented, republished, probably because that individual also needs original research to keep their metrics going up. But I think it's a fault also of our lack of interdisciplinary exchange. So whatever we can do also to think about this evaluation concept, and I think this panel and this discussion is a great start, to talk across fields, to learn from each other, I think we just need to do that more often and not reinvent the wheel. If there's something good, we can learn from each other. Maybe my very last point, when we think about peer review, and there is a big emphasis on peer review, I've heard that many times. I helped develop a course in peer review training for doctoral students at our university. And I just have to share this story that I can't tell you how often there are just mouths hanging open when I explain the peer review process and how things work, and wait a minute, so others evaluate you, but they're not paid, and I mean, you all know this system, but it's quite shocking to early career folks. We have to sort of learn something that is counterintuitive to everything we thought we knew about good, fair, unbiased quality assessment that somehow is innate to us. So I can only imagine on higher levels these problems of peer review of scientific literature persist in grant application, selection, also on higher levels, tenure, review committees, selection committees for professor positions, and so on. So I would just challenge us maybe to learn also what we know from the peer review of scientific journals and the problems there. Also a great place to get early career researchers involved in the reform, by the way. Those are just a few points off the top of my head. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jess. And finally, Professor Schiemank.
Okay. Let me start with a disclaimer. As a member of this academy, I just welcomed you on behalf of the Academy and its president. What I tell you now is my own personal reflections, not the official policy line of the Academy. So wherever you find fault with what I'm saying, don't blame it on them, but on me. We already heard quite some problems that are endemic to the existing evaluation practices and regimes. And I would like to add to that 3 dilemmas involved in evaluating. And dilemmas that would even exist if we had much better instruments and much better data. So dilemmas by their nature cannot be solved once and for all. You have to cope with them again and again. And I would like to point out these 3. The first one is in the time dimension. Whether you are on the side of the evaluators or on the side of those who are evaluated, sooner or later you get into a time conflict between time for your own research and time for being evaluated or evaluating others. And it's a considerable amount of time that is by now needed for both activities in this evaluation game. So first point is, isn't there a kind of meta-evaluation that is needed? Namely, asking the question, is the time spent for evaluating and being evaluated worth the resulting improvements in research? Nobody asked that, as far as I know. It's easy, it's difficult, of course, to measure this, but that would be, I think, worthwhile to do in future evaluations. The second dimension is, if we do not want to let the time conflict that I just mentioned end to the disadvantage of research, evaluation should, on the one hand, be kept as simple as possible. But on the other hand, we have many very good reasons to base evaluations on differentiated and reliable indicators and data, including qualitative data, which are even more time-consuming than standardized indicators. So how much complexity and diversity of the whole spectrum of the sciences and the humanities and their very different practices of doing research, actually, how much complexity and diversity do we need to capture in evaluations? And how can we capture both as parsimoniously as possible? That's a second question for which we are lacking answers. And the third dilemma is in the social dimension of the evaluation game. If one assumes that competition staged by evaluations is performance enhancing, at what point does this competition turn into demotivation? At what point does ruinous competition breed insecurity, distrust, and refusal to cooperate within the scientific community? In other words, what are standards and limits of a healthy and motivating competition? Underlying these three dilemmas and the questions I raised about them is an even more fundamental question. What, in fact, are the general goals we seek to achieve by establishing evaluations? Better research, to be sure, excellent research. We heard it several times. But that is much too vague. What we should know better is, for the specific kind of research that we evaluate in a specific evaluation exercise, what are the specific goals that we want to attain with regard to this kind of research, not to research in general. And I think if we find answers to these three questions related to the three dilemmas I mentioned and to the final questions I just raised, it might turn out that responsible evaluation is, measured by the status quo we have now, above all, much less evaluation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I fear that we have a fourth dilemma, and that is we don't have all the time to discuss all the issues that were brought up and I think are worthwhile discussing. And we should definitely make sure that the audience also has a chance to participate. I'll take the sort of the privilege of the moderator and would like to kick it off among this group because not unexpectedly the excellence the term excellence was all over the place and was kind of totally central. It's all about excellence. And just to be provocative, so isn't excellence in itself kind of an empty signifier? Doesn't it depend on what the criteria for excellence are? And if the criteria for excellence are journal impact factor, third-party funding, and so forth, I mean, we're kind of in the status quo, and then we can just stop discussing here. And so let me just give you a quote from Jack Stilgo, which I think is very much to this point. And he said, excellence is an old-fashioned word appealing to an old-fashioned ideal. Excellence tells us nothing about how important the science is and everything about who makes the selection. And that, I think, is in principle true. There is a saying also, we know what is excellent. And to be ultimately provocative, isn't this sort of the beginning or the end of a kind of a paternalistic approach that leads us to mainstream research? Because those that know what excellent is continue to select what's excellent. Isn't this the road to mainstream? I would like to, maybe you can start, because you used the term excellence like 15 times.
Okay,
I stopped counting.
20, even more.
20, yes.
Yeah, no, it's a great introduction. Thank you for that. I had, the whole time I had the feeling that we're more or less carefully tiptoeing around that issue that you addressed now, what excellence really is. And it's like the wag the dog issue. If you say excellence, comes out when you look at the H factor or what's in it, then nothing is won. I completely agree with you. I would be so bold to say, and I would like to know how the people in this room or you on the panel would see it. I mean, every field of science has a definition of excellence, basically boiling down to the issue if there is some cutting edge new insights moving the frontier ahead. And if you look at the different fields of science, I mean, my field is law, for example. It's a deductive science. It works on a completely other scale than, let's say, biology or natural sciences or something like that. But there's always a definition in each field which is defined by content and not by procedures. And I think we should say that this is the core of excellence. And I would absolutely agree with the criticism to say, okay, we look at an issue or at a proposal, then we like move our metrics on it, and if the metrics provide a good result, this is excellent. This is not enough. I would completely agree to that. But we should focus on that content core of what excellence is. That would be my contribution to that issue.
Any other?
Yep.
Would you?
I think there is a huge muddle, and you touched on this, in the use of excellence. So I agree, there are different ways of being excellent. There's different ways of being excellent in sport. If you're a fast runner, you have to run fast. If you're a high jumper, you have to jump high, not fast. So, and we're making that same mistake. We're saying excellence is not only about producing great scientific output, but also about being a good citizen, also about being a good mentor, also about being a good, communicator. I think we're looking at, we can look at excellence in all of these categories. Excellence just means it's about a level along some axis, where the top is excellent, and the middle is mediocrity, and the bottom is, I don't know a good word for it. We don't care about it. So I think we've got to get that muddled. We want excellence in mentorship in some contexts, in communication in other contexts, and in creative discovery in the third. So we shouldn't muddle those. So that's just a response. I wish I could have you on our task force, but I want to add a fourth dilemma, which I think is being ignored. And that is that we like to pretend that what we do and how we evaluate is objective. It bloody well isn't. So we do recognize, we know I know excellence when I see it. Mm-hmm. That's true for a very small number of grants that are often judged on the wrong criteria, and when you've got a panel and you need consensus, it gets even worse. You know the ones that are really useless. But in the middle, the idea, and this is also about wasting time, everybody's time on evaluation, the idea that we can distinguish within the gray zone is just wrong, and I wish more, and not just the Volkswagen Stiftung would acknowledge this. I wish we could.
Absolutely, and that I would put this sort of the question to you, for me, would be, isn't the consequence of what you just said that lotteries should play a big role in this? I mean, not just like
not evaluate.
Throwing it out, but the way like Volkswagen does it, and they do it in a controlled study even. And that is, of course, it's like what you said, it's about the gray zone. So you weed out the ones that where there's pretty much agreement that that's not leading anywhere. But very often on all the panels that I have sat, there's always in the end like this very hard selection between a few. Yeah. And we all know that the decision that in the end is made is completely erratic. It's about who's the loudest proponent of it and whatever. I mean, and isn't there a role for chance, for lottery?
At least a bigger role than we have it now. I think so. And the Volkswagen experiment is quite interesting. And a sociological colleague of mine is making a kind of evaluation of that experience. But with regard to the question of excellence, let me give you an example. In the years 2004, 2005, this German Wissenschaftsrat, the Science Council, devised a method it called Forschungsrating, science rating, research rating, to be more precise. And they then chose two cases where they wanted to find out how that worked. Two disciplines in Germany, chemistry and sociology. So the whole of German chemistry and the whole of German sociology were evaluated. I was member of the sociology panel, which consisted of about 15 colleagues. And we needed twice as long as the chemists, for the simple reason that we couldn't find any reliable metrics for most of our products. And the person in charge of this commission, also a member here of the Academy, Friedhelm Neidhardt, forced us all to read. So we asked everybody who, every institute or every department to send us selected pieces of their work, which they thought those are our best of collection. And we read all of that. Of course, not everybody of us 15 read everything, but we divided it up among us. And then we had long discussions, because every piece of work was read by at least two persons, and sometimes two very different persons from sociology. We had long discussions, and I think afterwards we thought we did better justice to the quality of the work of our colleagues than we could have done in any other way. But we were aware that we made many mistakes, even mistakes that we weren't aware of course. And we were aware of the fact that we, from this diversity of things we had to read, had now a much better feeling of what quality and excellence in sociology is. But I mean, sociology is a small discipline compared to chemistry, for instance, so it was impossible for the colleagues to do that in their discipline. So that's one of the things. I liked to be part of that group, and I think we did quite good work, but it couldn't be done for all disciplines, and that's the problem.
Can I sort of pass this on to Julie Maxton? A bit, this reminds me of the Research Excellence Framework and the impact stories. So could you comment on whether these impact stories, are you in a position to comment on it? I mean, did they work? Is this maybe a valuable approach, that if we are talking now not about, well, we could even talk about individual researchers, but this is more about institutions. So what about these impact stories? Is this an alternative?
Well, I think thank you, and thank you for quoting Jack Stilgo, because he was a colleague of mine at the Royal Society, but he's left now. I think it's variable. I mean, I think the impact stories sometimes work well, but I think there are other things that need to be taken into account. There are many deficiencies in the process. So, for example, there's quite a lot of work at the moment about having public engagement being taken into account in the research excellence framework, for example. And also there is a knowledge excellence framework, which doesn't get much sort of airplay, but it's about, you know, it's not just about writing and putting articles in journals. It's about, are there intellectual property aspects to research that has been done? Are there other things which can give an idea of excellence? But just to follow your point, I think it's really important that we get away from the idea that there is one person that can hit the heights of excellence and everybody else just ranges down underneath it. I mean, to your point about chance, I mean, certainly when I was the Dean of Law, which is also my discipline, I toyed with the idea of once students had got beyond a certain level, you could have a lottery for who got into the law school, because it would be futile to think, and it would be arrogant, in my opinion, to think that we could work out exactly who would do well in law and who would not. And all of my students, and I'm in touch with many of them, some you wouldn't have thought would make great lawyers, are doing very, very well, and others, the complete opposite. And so I think we have to allow that sort of extra element of chance, if you like.
A lot about, I guess this is a lot about the inability to predict success from whatever we are evaluating. I would like to ask Jess, if you hear this lottery story, how does this resonate with you? Would you accept, I mean, you're applying to a program, and with a certain level, you get into a lottery. Would you say, you're totally crazy because I put in so much effort and now I'm in a lottery? Or how would you, what would you say if you're evaluated by a lottery?
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. I think it's really interesting, and having a lot of statistics training, I actually think my chances with the lottery are a lot better in some circles than... Yeah, I mean, it's true. So, you know, there are, I think many of us, as we're trying to find our direction, who, you know, broaden our scope in research. So I do something that's in the middle of neurology, epidemiology, and pull in some adjacent fields as well, and that's tough to get funded. So yeah, going for something like the experiment is super appealing, and I'll take my chances there. I actually do, quite frankly, think they're better. I mean, I do agree with a need for some basic quality control, but as you mentioned, if you know that people meet the criteria and are in this upper tier, I even wrote down earlier, coin flip seems to me the fairest way to solve it, and then you also maybe don't take it as personally, because you know at the end you made it. That would be also really good feedback for me to have. Hey, you made it into that top tier, and we decided for the winner by a coin flip. It wasn't you, but you have the stuff it takes. And that may just be the encouragement I need, instead of a flat-out rejection with the standard legal statement, actually, we can't give you any reasons why you were rejected, so you won't be able to learn from this, sorry. That comes with a lot of rejections. So I like the idea.
You're a statistician, and I forgot about that.
It's a good question.
So maybe after your response, we should open. Would you agree that we can open it up to you? Or,
Sure, go ahead.
So, but you have an immediate response.
I just wanted to ask the question. I mean, this is fascinating, and as far as I know, even the DFG, German Research Foundation, has a small kind of experimental field trying with that game theory luck event. But aren't we making a principal point out of a problem which is defined otherwise? I mean, if we look back to 2007, the very first call of the ERC, you were not in office then, but you remember that 3% or 4% success rate, because it was the signing was so incredible. And in cases like that, which happen sometimes on the European level especially, it's quite clear that there is no real argument to say this proposal is better than that one. This is absolutely clear. But in a very well-funded system, which at least we have in parts of Europe, or let's talk about Germany, does it really make sense to move into that that chance system? It's just a question from my side, because I think sometimes it's like born out of necessity because there's not enough money to have a sound and fair competition. Just a question.
I guess we should leave it open. As no one could ask questions, so let's just leave it open. I think it's a fair question. I think we could go on for quite a while. Maybe it was preposterous to have a title that is that sort of encompassing as assessment of researchers. I mean, we have seen that there's so many layers to it. It's so complex, so idiosyncratic. We haven't even actually touched upon the issue of specificity to different fields, and we haven't talked about the global South. Let's put it this way. I mean, this was a very European-centric discussion. So there's still room to continue this. And I will certainly not conclude with a summary of this. That would be also very preposterous. I think I just want to highlight a few things that I think, a few buzzwords that came up so often. One was about excellence. And I liked Julie's term of the it's an elastic concept, and so I think we have to play with the elastics of it. Another theme I think which needs much more discussion and thought is how to involve the junior scientists, and I think you had a very good one, like reminding us to involve junior scientists every time we can do it, and I think we can do it much more often than it's done now. We had a lot of discussion about the lottery. We found out it's kind of it's an interesting concept, but certainly not an accepted one. I like the idea of the magic triangle and thinking about the magic triangle in the sense that we are trying to with this to bring together fairness, the objectivity and the efficiency, and that we're always at one. It's easy to satisfy one of those angles of the triangle, but to get them all is really hard. And so I guess my final comment would be again to look at the EU process, which I think is even if the German Rectors Conference is not signing it, I think it's we should follow it and maybe as individuals or as institutions take part of it. And I know that the BUA I think has already signed it. The Quest Center has signed it, and the Charité. No, not the Charité. Okay, we will get the Charité to sign it. So we have to just to be patient there. So my last remark or comment is please watch this space in terms of the award that I was mentioning several times, the Einstein Foundation Award on promoting the quality of research. For those of you who don't know about it and want to know more about it, at the exit, I think there are some brochures that I think explain what this is about. And as I said, we will announce the 2022 winners 1st of December, and there will be an event, and this event will be streamed. So and there's also this early career researcher event around it, which I think is very interesting because this is something that is completely organized mostly by early career researchers from the global South. So it will be very interesting to see how they discuss these issues. Lastly, I think behind us there is a buffet, and I hope this will be removed, or the buffet will yes, thank you. So I think that's so thank you very much, the panel, the members of the panel, the audience, and of course also the Einstein Foundation, the Hochschulrektorenkonferenz and the Academy for hosting it. And thank you. And maybe some discussion at the buffet.